My mother called me at 1:12 in the morning and said my name the way people say it when they want to skip over every year they failed you and land directly on your usefulness. Madeline, she said, breathless and sharp, how fast can you get downtown? I was awake already. That part almost makes the whole thing feel scripted, but it wasn't. I'd been home for maybe 40 minutes after a 12-hour day and a client meeting that ran too late, and I was still sitting at my kitchen counter in stockings and a half-unbuttoned blouse, eating cold takeout over an open file. The city outside my apartment windows looked washed in that weird silver-blue color it gets after midnight, when everything feels both empty and observed. I checked the clock on my oven and said, "Why?" There was a pause. Not a long one. Just long enough for me to hear the panic under her voice and long enough for her to realize I wasn't going to do what she expected, which was ask no questions and start moving. "It's Silas," she said. "He's been arrested." A year earlier that sentence would have shocked me. That night, what I felt first wasn't shock. It was something colder and quieter. Something that slid into place. Not because I had predicted handcuffs. Not because I'd spent years hoping he would finally crash into consequence. I hadn't. Silas had always lived in a very specific kind of protection. The kind built out of charm and lower standards and the way families excuse the child who feels easy over the one who feels demanding. No, what I felt slide into place was recognition. Because that was the first time in my adult life my family had called me in the middle of the night and sounded certain that what I did mattered. My mother was still talking. Something about downtown. Something about booking. Something about a misunderstanding. Something about how they wouldn't let her see him yet. I let her talk herself winded. Then I asked, what was he arrested for? Another pause. This one was heavier. They're saying fraud, she said finally. And some other things. I don't know. We need you here. We. That word should be carved somewhere. Maybe on the wall of every family where one child is expected to earn and absorb and rescue while another child is allowed to drift through life surrounded by softer consequences. We need you here. Not how are you? Not I know it's late. Not I'm sorry to call like this after all this time. We need you here. I leaned back on the stool and stared at the dark reflection of my own face in the window above the sink. I looked older than I felt and more awake than I wanted to be. I had trial notes under one hand and sesame noodles drying out in a carton beside me. Somewhere downstairs a car alarm chirped once and stopped. "Madeline," my mother said. I almost laughed. Because I knew exactly what she pictured on the other end of that call. Her daughter the lawyer. Her daughter who lived close enough to the courthouse to feel useful. Her daughter who knew the system. Her daughter who could translate fear into procedure. Her daughter who had, for years, been too intense, too busy, too serious, too career-obsessed, too unavailable for family dinners and holiday games and brunches built around pretending nothing in our house had ever been off balance. Until that moment. At 1:14 in the morning, with her golden son sitting in a holding cell, I was finally exactly the daughter she wanted. "Which precinct?" I asked. She told me. I wrote it down on a legal pad. Then I said, "I'm not coming down there tonight." She inhaled like I had slapped her. "What?" "I'm not his attorney." "You don't even know what happened." "I know enough to know I'm not his attorney." "You can't leave us alone in this." There it was. Not him. Us. As if the family were a single body and I had simply wandered from it for a while. I pinched the bridge of my nose and closed my eyes. The truth is, my answer was not built in that one moment. It had been under construction for years. That no had started forming long before an arrest report and long before my mother learned how quickly panic can turn indifference into praise. It started, if I'm honest, in a room full of strangers cheering for each other's children while I sat with my own empty row. I became a lawyer on a Thursday afternoon in late spring. There are some accomplishments you imagine will rearrange people. You don't say that out loud because it sounds childish, and maybe it is. But everybody carries a few private fantasies from adolescence into adulthood. Mine was that if I worked hard enough, if I made myself undeniable enough, if I built a life so concrete and respectable and difficult that nobody could shrug at it, then one day my family would finally look at me without that faint, complicated disappointment they carried like perfume. Not disapproval exactly. That would have been easier. Disappointment is worse because it can hide inside polite smiles. My father liked things he could explain in one sentence to other men over drinks. My son's in medical device sales. My boy just made regional director. My kid won the club championship. He liked careers that sounded effortless and personalities that looked easy. Silas gave him all of that. Silas could tell a story without getting stuck in the details. He could make a room laugh. He could shake hands with anyone and leave them feeling like they had known him for years. My father mistook that for substance because it came in the shape he understood. My mother loved whichever child made her feel most relaxed in public. Silas was never the difficult child for her. He was the one who took pictures at brunch. The one who remembered birthdays because he set reminders. The one who hugged with one arm and called her beautiful in restaurant parking lots. My mother valued gestures with witnesses. She valued whatever could be seen, repeated, admired. I was the child who asked follow-up questions. I was the child who ruined easy versions of things. When I was 13 and told my parents I wanted to be a lawyer, my father laughed and asked if that was because I liked arguing so much. My mother said, "You'll need to learn how not to sound so cold." Silas, who was 16 and had just gotten suspended for copying homework twice in one semester, said, "Can lawyers object at Thanksgiving?" Because I'd pay to see that. Everyone laughed. That was the rhythm of my house. If Silas failed a test, it was because school bored him. If I got a 98, the first question was where the other 2 points went. If Silas forgot an anniversary dinner or showed up late to a holiday, it became a family joke about his chaotic energy. If I missed anything because I was studying or working or trying to outrun the invisible requirement that I be excellent just to count as even, I was told I needed balance. People hear stories like that and picture obvious cruelty. They picture wicked mothers and sneering fathers and brothers with movie villain smirks. Real favoritism is usually much quieter. It's the way one child is allowed to be unfinished forever while the other is expected to arrive polished. It's the way one person's effort becomes background noise and another person's mediocrity gets lit like a stage. By the time I passed the bar, I had learned not to expect applause. But I still thought maybe a major enough milestone could overcome pattern. I texted the family group 3 weeks in advance. Swearing in is May 18th at 2. I'd love for you to be there. They said families can sit together, and there's a reception after. My father answered first. Can't. Silas has the member guest final that day. My mother wrote right after him. We already promised we'd go support him. You know how important this is for networking. Silas added a sunglasses emoji and wrote, "You already passed the test, counselor." The ceremony is just the decorative part. Decorative part. I stared at my phone so long the screen dimmed. Then I wrote back, "No worries. I understand." That lie cost me more than I knew at the time. The ceremony itself was beautiful in the way public milestones often are when you're trying not to cry through them. There were speeches about service and responsibility. There were judges in dark robes and families packed into rows of folding chairs, some elegant, some overexcited, some already taking blurry pictures before the official oath even started. I sat alone. Not tragically alone in a dramatic movie way. Just realistically alone. My purse on the chair beside me. My phone face down in my lap. My lipstick too bright because I had done it in the courthouse bathroom under terrible lighting and wanted to look like somebody whose life had company in it. The woman on my right had brought her parents, 2 aunts, a grandmother, and a little cousin who kept clapping too early. Every time the little cousin shouted, the family would turn red and whisper apologies to everyone around them. At one point the grandmother leaned over and said to me, "I'm so sorry if we're being distracting, honey." I smiled and said, "You're not." What I wanted to say was, please don't apologize for loving each other out loud. Afterward, when everybody spilled into the lobby and the marble floor turned into a storm of flowers and hugs and proud photos, I stood near a pillar with my certificate folder in both hands and tried to decide how long I had to remain visible before I could leave without looking strange. That was when Thomas Reed found me. He was one of the partners at the firm I'd accepted an associate position with. Mid-50s, silver at the temples, not warm in a sentimental way, but observant in the way good trial lawyers are. He had 2 daughters in college and a habit of wearing expensive ties with coffee stains somewhere near the bottom by noon. "There you are," he said. "We're doing photos with the incoming associates." He looked past me, scanning the crowd. Then he looked back. "Where's your crew?" I could have told the truth. Instead I heard myself say, "Scheduling conflict." It was one of the first times I understood that embarrassment makes people concise. Thomas didn't challenge it. He didn't say the sympathetic thing. He just stood beside me for half a second longer than necessary and then said, "All right. Come on. If nobody's here to make too much of you, the firm will have to handle it." That should not have meant as much as it did. But when you grow up rationing acknowledgement, even professional decency can feel like rain. The firm took photos of the new associates on the courthouse steps. Somebody handed me a bottle of water. Someone else made a joke about how half of us still looked like students playing dress-up. Later that evening Thomas's wife sent a tray of catered food to the office because, as the receptionist explained, she always did that for the new class. Little things. Organized things. Ordinary things people do when they have already decided you matter. I went home that night, put my certificate in a drawer because I didn't know where else to put it, and watched my family post pictures from the club. My father in a cap and pressed polo shirt. My mother holding a Bloody Mary in a stemless glass. Silas grinning beside a sponsor banner, arm around a man with sunburned cheeks and a $1,000 belt. My mother captioned one photo, "Big day for our boy." I stared at that caption until the words stopped looking like language. Then I put my phone face down and learned a lesson I would spend years pretending not to know. You can achieve something enormous and still remain optional in the place that named you. I joined Reed and Potter the following Monday and started doing the kind of work most people say they respect until they meet someone who actually does it. Criminal defense scares people because it forces them into complicated sentences. It makes them say things like, "I believe in the Constitution, but," or "Everyone deserves representation, except," or "I support due process, as long as nobody inconvenient uses it." I loved the work almost immediately. Not because it was glamorous. It wasn't. It was fluorescent interview rooms and stale coffee and motions filed at 11:56 p.m. It was jail visits that smelled like bleach and old fear. It was clients lying to you, clients sobbing on voicemail, clients telling the truth too late, prosecutors posturing, judges exhausted by the whole theater of human damage that marched through their courtrooms in 3-minute increments. I loved it because it was one of the few places in the world where clarity mattered more than charm. The law did not care if you were my brother. The law did not care if your mother cried prettily. The law did not care if your father could tell a good story at a club bar. The law cared what could be proved, what could be challenged, what could be argued, what the state had done correctly, what it had cut corners on, what it had assumed it could get away with because nobody would force it to slow down. I was good at forcing it to slow down. I built a reputation fast. Not overnight. I don't believe in that kind of career mythology. But faster than most. I worked the hours nobody romanticizes after they leave school. I took the ugly files. I learned judges' rhythms. I stayed late with paralegals. I listened harder than some clients deserved and harder than some partners expected. By year 3, I was being trusted with cases people didn't hand to young associates unless they thought the young associate had the particular kind of stubbornness that can survive a courtroom without turning theatrical. My family barely asked about any of it. Every now and then my mother would tell someone at church, "Madeline is in law," as though I worked inside an abstract weather system. My father would introduce me at functions as our attorney, which always struck me as interesting because the pride appeared almost exclusively in public and never survived direct conversation. At Thanksgiving the year after my swearing in, I came straight from the office with still damp hair because I had showered at work after a client vomited in an interview room during a panic attack. I was tired enough that the drive to my parents' house felt underwater. Silas was already there, perfectly rested, wearing a cashmere quarter-zip my mother immediately made me touch because it was such a nice quality. He had been promoted again in some sales structure I never fully understood because every time I asked what he actually sold, the answer involved synergy, distribution, client development, and golf. My father spent most of dinner talking about one of Silas's accounts, a regional expansion, and a conference in Scottsdale. He nodded through my mention of a suppression hearing I'd won that week and then turned back to ask Silas whether his company would cover the resort suite or if he'd upgrade out of pocket. At some point Silas asked whether I was seeing anyone. I said no. He said, "You're married to your calendar." My mother laughed. "You do work too much," she said. "At some point you have to build a life." I remember looking down at my plate and noticing the way the cranberry sauce had bled into the mashed potatoes. I remember my father adding, with that airy tone he used when he thought he was being constructive, "Silas works hard too, but he understands people matter." That was the part that lodged. Not that I was too busy. That I did not understand people. As if spending my days listening to clients at the worst moment of their lives had somehow made me less human than the son who could remember a bartender's name and send a good Christmas card. I said, "I understand people fine." Silas smiled in that relaxed, brotherly way that made him so hard to dislike if you only met him in bursts. "You understand files," he said. "Not the same thing." My mother nodded. My father carved turkey. And just like that, in a room where I had spent years trying to become worth keeping, the narrative was set again. Silas the social one. Silas the balanced one. Silas the son who knew what really mattered. I lasted through pie and left before coffee. The next Christmas, my parents hosted a larger dinner. Cousins. Neighbors. The type of holiday event my mother loved because it allowed her to curate a version of the family she preferred, lively, warm, photogenic, mildly competitive in a socially acceptable way. She did matching napkins. My father lit the fireplace even though it was too warm for it. Silas arrived late enough to be interesting and early enough to be forgiven. Gift exchange after dessert had always been more important to my mother than the actual meal. It created a structured arena for gratitude. Everybody seated. Everybody watched. Everybody required to perform reaction. My father gave Silas a leather weekender bag with his initials stamped near the zipper. It was the kind of thing people call timeless when they mean expensive. He gave me a generic home gift set with hand lotion, tea sachets, and a candle in a box printed with a snowflake pattern that still had a discount sticker shadow on the bottom because whoever bought it had peeled the label off too fast. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not heightening for effect. I actually held that box in my hands and saw the pale square where the price sticker had been. Silas saw it too. He leaned back in his chair, looked from his bag to my box, and said lightly, "Well, at least yours says relax. That feels on brand." Everyone laughed. Not cruelly. That's important. Not the sharp laugh people do when they want blood. It was worse. It was the easy laugh people give when the humiliation is socially tidy enough to disguise itself as a joke. I set the box on my lap and said, I should head out. My mother looked genuinely annoyed. We haven't done coffee. I have work tomorrow. It's Christmas Eve. I still have work tomorrow. Silas swirled bourbon in a glass and said, Madeline's calendar doesn't observe holidays. I stood up. My mother followed me into the front hall while the others kept talking in the dining room. She lowered her voice like she was speaking to a child embarrassing her in public. Do not make a thing out of this. I put my coat on slowly. Out of what? You know exactly what. No, I said. I actually don't. She crossed her arms. You are too old to be sensitive about gifts. I looked at her face, truly looked at it, and realized she had already decided what had happened. There was no curiosity there. No possibility that maybe I was tired of being assigned smaller and smaller positions in the family while being told the shrinking was in my head. I'm not sensitive about the gift, I said. I'm tired of the pattern. She blinked. That word made her uncomfortable. Pattern. It implied repetition. Intention. System. Everything with you becomes a courtroom, she said. That sentence followed me home. At first it hurt. Later it became useful. Because she was right in the narrowest way. Everything did become a courtroom with me eventually. Not because I wanted conflict. Because I had spent enough time around evidence to know when I was being asked to ignore it. I stopped going to every dinner after that. Not dramatically. I didn't announce a break. I just began missing more things without apology. A Sunday lunch became impossible because of a filing deadline. Then an Easter brunch because I had prep. Then a golf club fundraiser I had never wanted to attend in the first place. My absence started as logistics and turned, slowly, into principle. My mother complained. My father asked whether I was trying to prove a point. Silas sent one message that said, don't exile yourself over a candle. A candle. That was the genius of families like mine. They always reduced the argument to the smallest object available. Never the years. Never the hierarchy. Never the distribution of warmth. Just the candle. The scheduling conflict. The harmless joke. The single dinner. The one late arrival. The one small oversight. People who benefit from pattern become very invested in making every individual incident look too tiny to matter. Work, meanwhile, kept giving me reasons not to look back. By my 5th year, judges knew my face. Prosecutors adjusted when they saw my name on a caption. Younger associates started stopping by my office to ask how to phrase things before hearings. Thomas Reed began leaving more complicated files in my box with comments written in thick blue ink. See what you can do with this. Or this one needs patience. Or don't let the state bully the timeline. He never praised too much, which made it mean more when he did. The first time I won a case the office had already written off as likely unwinnable, he closed my door after the client left and said, that was grown-up lawyering. I smiled. He added, I hope somebody takes you out to dinner. I almost said, it'll probably be takeout with a transcript. Instead I said, I'm all right. Thomas studied me in that too perceptive way of his. Yes, he said. That's the part one worry about. His wife, Ellen, sent pasta for half the office that Friday because she had heard about the win. My own mother texted 3 days later to ask whether I knew a good dermatologist. Not for me. For her friend. I gave her 2 names and watched myself do it. That's another ugly part of family imbalance. The child who gets less love is often still the child expected to provide the most competence. I became the person who knew what school district to choose, what clause to check in a lease, what wording not to use in an email to HR, which doctor to call, whether a contractor estimate sounded inflated, how to read a contract, how to respond to a demand letter, when to contest a ticket, how long a police report usually takes, whether a non-disclosure provision meant anything, what records a hospital has to release, whether a neighbor's camera could legally point toward a driveway. The family did not celebrate my expertise. It consumed it in teaspoons and acted surprised when I stopped offering the cup. Silas's relationship to me was even stranger. He was not a monster. That would have been simpler. He was affectionate in bursts. Thoughtless in patterns. He could call me Mads in a voice that sounded almost tender and then make me the punchline at dinner 10 minutes later without noticing any contradiction. He would ask for my opinion when it came to a lease or a contract, thank me sincerely, then mock my job as humorless the next time our parents needed a laugh. He was the kind of person who never had to examine himself because other people were always busy adjusting around him. Once, at a cousin's engagement party, I overheard one of my aunts telling someone, "Madeline is brilliant, but Silas is the one who really knows how to enjoy life." That sentence bothered me for years because it captured the family mythology so cleanly. I was allowed to be brilliant as long as it could be framed as a personality defect. Silas was allowed to be shallow as long as it looked fun from a distance. Then, little by little, life outside the family started becoming too real for their mythology to keep pace with. I bought an apartment on my own. Silas leased a luxury car he couldn't comfortably afford because appearance mattered for clients. I built trial experience. Silas built what my mother called relationships, by which she meant brunch contacts and golf memberships and an endless parade of men named Scott who seemed permanently sunburned. I started supervising younger lawyers. Silas started talking about moving into management and then didn't. None of that turned him into a villain. But it did create pressure. Not visible pressure at first. Just the kind that collects behind the walls of a life built on being the easy child. Easy children sometimes panic when everyone around them quietly starts expecting adulthood. The first sign that something had shifted came 6 months before the arrest, and I missed its significance at the time. It was my father's birthday dinner. Small group. Steakhouse. Private room because my mother liked the illusion of importance more than the menu. Silas was late, which nobody commented on until he arrived, when it became endearing. He kissed my mother's cheek, apologized to my father, sat down, and launched straight into a story about a client entertainment weekend that somehow included a condo, a boat, and a bill somebody else had apparently covered. My father laughed too hard. My mother asked for details she would have called irresponsible if they came from me. Then I noticed something strange. Every time my father asked a follow-up question about work, Silas got vaguer. Not less confident. Vaguer. Words like transition. Temporary. Compliance issue. Internal review. Nothing clear enough to hold. I watched him talk and felt that old courtroom instinct stir. Not because I thought crime. Because I recognized deflection. When someone is lying, people imagine obvious tells. Sweating. Fidgeting. Looking away. Real liars, especially practiced ones, often do something else. They widen the frame. They use more business nouns. They replace sequence with atmosphere. They make you feel like specifics would be gauche. On the drive home I caught myself thinking, something is off with him. Then I dismissed it. Family teaches you to distrust your own pattern recognition when using it would make the room less pleasant. By the time my phone lit up at 1:12 a.m., I understood that instinct had been late, not wrong. Back in my kitchen, my mother was still breathing into the silence between us. "Madeline," she said again, "please." I tapped the pen against the legal pad. "Has he asked for a lawyer?" "He asked for you." "Of course he did. There is a kind of panic that reveals exactly how a person has categorized you. Not sister. Not daughter. Not complicated relative with whom he had built years of imbalance. Lawyer. Resource. Access point. Converter of chaos into options. What exactly are the charges? I asked. I told you, fraud. Something about company accounts. Maybe travel reimbursements. There was a search. I don't know. They came to his apartment tonight and then took him in. I looked over at the case file on my counter, the one I had been reviewing before the call. 3 tabs. 2 witness statements. 1 police interview transcript full of holes. A life I had built piece by piece sat open in front of me. The work I actually did. The clients who retained me. The rules I lived by. The reputation that did not arrive by magic. My mother had not once, in all the years since my swearing in, called me after midnight to say she was proud of that life. Now she wanted me in an interrogation room. I'll text you 2 names, I said. They're excellent white-collar defense attorneys. She actually gasped. That's your answer? It's the correct answer. He is your brother. And I'm not his attorney. You have no idea what this is doing to your father. I stood up and walked to the sink because I suddenly could not bear the stillness of the stool. What it's doing to Dad, I said, or what it's doing to Silas. You know what I mean. No, I said. Actually, I don't. That was new too. Not the irritation. The refusal to translate vague family language into something kinder than it was. She changed tactics. I know things haven't always been perfect. That sentence nearly took my head off. Not perfect. As if my empty row at the courthouse and the years of dismissal and the holiday humiliations and the steady consumption of my competence without any real regard were all just weather. This is not the night for a list of grievances, she said. There it was. The list. People call it a list when they don't want you to notice it is actually a record. You're right, I said. It isn't. For a second I thought she heard hope in my tone. Then I finished. It's the night for you to call somebody else. And I hung up. I didn't sleep much after that. Partly because my phone kept buzzing. My father once. My mother 3 more times. Silas once from an unknown number I assumed had been a holding room courtesy. I did not answer any of them. I texted the names of 2 excellent defense lawyers to my mother and then turned my phone face down. At 4 in the morning I sat on my sofa in a sweatshirt and thought about the weirdness of family emergencies. They do not just present you with the present. They force all your earlier selves into the room too. The girl with the empty row at the ceremony. The woman holding the discount shadow candle box. The daughter standing in hallways while her mother accused her of making a thing out of nothing. The sister who had kept proofreading leases and answering insurance questions and explaining legal basics to people who did not want to hear what her work meant until her work could save somebody they preferred. By sunrise I knew one thing with clarity. If I walked into that precinct, I would become useful in exactly the way they had trained me to be useful. And once I did it, they would call it family. They would call it what family does. They would say this proved we were still connected beneath all the hurt. They would use one crisis to erase a decade of hierarchy. No. By 8, the voicemail from my father had arrived. He sounded older than usual, less sure of his own authority. Madeline, call me. This is serious. Not hello. Not please. Just serious, as if that word were some new key he had discovered for me. I went to work. That sounds heartless to some people, I know. But law teaches you the difference between urgency and theater. There were already attorneys being retained. There were processes underway. Nobody was going to disappear because I took the elevator to the 11th floor and attended a morning strategy meeting. Thomas saw my face before I sat down. "Who died?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. That got half a laugh out of him. After the meeting he stopped by my office, shut the door, and leaned against the frame. "Something happened. My brother got arrested." He absorbed that without visible surprise. "Need you to stay out of it?" "Need me to fix it." "And?" "I won't." He nodded like I had answered correctly on an exam only he could see. "Good," he said. "Never let family turn your license into a hostage." I stared at him. That sentence would have taken me years to invent on my own. He crossed his arms. "If you want my uninvited opinion, this won't really be about representation. It'll be about role assignment. They'll try to put you back where they're comfortable." I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. "Yes." Thomas pointed toward the floor as if the office beneath us contained all human patterns. "Then don't argue the old case," he said. "Just decline the new one." That turned out to be some of the best advice I had ever gotten. Because by lunchtime my family was already trying to drag me into two battles at once. The practical question of whether I would help Silas, and the emotional question of whether I was cruel enough to refuse family in crisis. Those are not the same case. My mother met with one of the lawyers I recommended and apparently found him insufficiently reassuring. My father called to say the man was too clinical. Rachel, my cousin, who always drifted closest to whichever version of the family looked strongest at the time, texted me to say your parents are shattered, can't you at least talk to him? Even my Aunt Linda, who had once told people Silas knew how to enjoy life, wrote that families need their strong ones in bad times. Their strong ones. That phrase stayed with me. Because that was what I had always been, whether anyone said it kindly or not. The strong one. The one who managed. The one who did not get to be messy because there was already a designated messy child and a family only has so much tolerance for disorder. By late afternoon, I finally listened to the voicemail Silas had left. "Mads," he said, voice rougher than usual, still trying for casual. "Look, I know this is weird. They're blowing things up. It's accounting stuff. Travel. Reimbursements. Whatever. I just need to know what they're doing. Call me back if you can. No apology. No acknowledgement of timing. No awareness that the request itself was made inside years of imbalance." He still sounded like my brother. That was the dangerous part. Real family leverage almost never arrives wearing the exact face of the harm. It comes dressed in familiarity. In history. In little old nicknames. In voices that know how to make you remember the 13 good afternoons buried under the 100 smaller injuries. I did call back eventually. Not because he deserved it. Because I needed to hear myself say the boundary out loud. The attorney-client line at County put a delay on everything. A metallic pause after every sentence, like the system itself wanted you to understand intimacy was not the point. "Madeline?" "Yes." He exhaled like relief. "Thank God." "Okay. So I think they're trying to build a fraud case around expenses and some vendor payments." "It's not what it looks like." "I'm sure you believe that." He ignored the tone. "I need you to tell me what to do." No silence. Then, incredulous, "No? I'm not your lawyer. You haven't even heard the facts." "I don't need the facts to know I'm not representing you." He switched immediately to offense. "This is unbelievable." "No," I said. "Actually, it's very believable." What is that supposed to mean? It would have been satisfying to unload then. To make the call do double duty and prosecute the whole family system in one clean burst of righteous language. But Thomas was right. That would have dragged the old case back into motion. So I kept it narrow. It means I'm not representing a family member. I gave Mom 2 excellent names. Pick one. He laughed once, short and disbelieving. You seriously can't do this one thing? One thing. That phrase is the sibling version of a crowbar. I leaned back in my office chair and looked at the framed certificate on the shelf across from me. Not the bar admission one. Another one. Some bland professional recognition from a legal organization that had meant almost nothing when it arrived and yet still sat there in decent glass because my office manager believed in surfaces. One thing, I repeated. That's what this is to you. Oh, come on, don't do the whole martyr thing. I almost admired the reflex. He still thought the emotional terms of the relationship were his to set. It's not martyrdom, I said. It's a boundary. Because I missed your little ceremony? He snapped. There it was. Not just remembered. Minimized. My grip tightened on the phone so hard I felt the edge press into my palm. This is exactly why I'm not doing this with you. Madeline. The tone changed. Lower. Colder. Less brotherly. I am in jail. And I'm still not your lawyer. I hung up first. The next several weeks unfolded in exactly the shape I should have expected and still hated. My parents kept trying to reroute reality through guilt. At first it was pleading. Then outrage. Then moral language. Then revisionist history. My mother said families don't keep score when one of their own is in trouble. My father said my professionalism had made me rigid. Rachel said I was making a bad moment about old resentment. Silas alternated between indignant, wounded, and weirdly charming, as if enough familiarity could still pull me back into usefulness. They all wanted the same thing, though not all in the same form. Access. Not just to my legal skill. To my emotional compliance. To the old arrangement where I could be overlooked when I needed something and activated when they did. I did what Thomas had suggested. I declined the new case. I did not litigate the old one. When my mother called to say, I cannot believe your own brother is facing felony charges and you're hiding behind technicalities, I answered, I'm not discussing this. When my father said, you are letting personal feelings cloud your judgment, I said, my judgment is clear. When Silas texted, you know these lawyers. Put in a word, I wrote back, no. 3 letters. Nothing makes a family panic faster than brevity when they're used to your explanations. Of course, silence does not stop pressure. It just forces it to change tactics. My mother showed up at my office. That part still makes me angry because she knew better. She knew appearances mattered there. She knew I spent years keeping my personal life sealed off from my professional one unless I chose otherwise. But desperate people who have long depended on access rarely become more respectful under stress. They become more invasive. It was a Thursday around 4. I had just come out of a hearing and was halfway through dictating notes when my assistant, Natalie, knocked softly on my door and made a face I had only seen once before, when a client's ex had shown up screaming in reception. There's a woman asking for you, she said. She says she's your mother. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Did she say what she wants? Natalie gave me a look that suggested the answer was obvious. She said it's family. Of course she did. I walked out to reception and saw her immediately. Perfect lipstick. Pearl studs. Cream coat. A posture arranged for sympathy. If you only glanced, she looked like a woman concerned for her daughter. If you looked longer, you saw the fixedness. The performance under the concern. She stood when she saw me and reached for my hands. I stepped back before she got there. It wasn't dramatic. Just precise. Natalie busied herself with papers she had already filed. The receptionist pretended to answer an email. In offices, people learn how to look away while hearing everything. "Can we talk?" my mother asked. "No, Madeline, don't do this here. You came here." She lowered her voice. "We need privacy." "No. You need leverage." Her face changed. Just for a second. Enough for me to see how tired she was beneath the makeup. Enough for me to understand this crisis had actually dented the family mythology. Silas had not simply had a bad night. He had damaged the story. "We are drowning," she whispered. "I should tell you I did not feel triumph. That would be cleaner. I felt something more complicated and less flattering. Recognition, yes. Vindication, partly. But also a dull ache because even then, even standing in the office where my life had actual weight, my mother could only approach me through emergency. "I gave you names," I said. "You gave us strangers." I almost smiled. That word again. Us. "I am not your stranger," she said, perhaps misreading my expression. "I am your mother." That might have worked once. Now it only sharpened things. "Yes," I said. "And you're in my reception area because you couldn't be bothered to sit in a courtroom when I became a lawyer." She flinched. Good. Not because I wanted cruelty. Because truth had spent too many years waiting politely outside the family home. "This is not the same thing," she said. "It's exactly the same thing." "No, it isn't." That was symbolic. "This is real." There it was. I do not know whether she realized, as soon as the words left her mouth, how much she had said. That was symbolic. This is real. My swearing in. Symbolic. My achievement. Decorative. My work. Real only now that it could protect the child she had always considered central. The receptionist looked down so hard at her keyboard I worried for the keys. I stood there in my navy suit with courthouse dust still on the hem and understood, with perfect clarity, that I was never going to get a better confession than that. "Thank you," I said. She looked startled. "For saying it plainly." "Madeline, no," I said, and for once my voice was not sharp. It was almost calm. "You need to leave. Please. You need to leave. Do you want your brother's life ruined?" I held her gaze. Then I said the truest sentence I had said to her in years. "I am not the one who ruined your son's life." She started crying. Not loudly. My mother was too elegant for that in public. Just controlled tears, one hand at her mouth, shoulders tight. 10 years earlier I would have broken right there. Instead I signaled Natalie to call security if my mother didn't leave in 30 seconds, and my mother, sensing the limit with a precision she had always possessed when consequences might finally attach, collected her purse and walked out without another word. The whole office pretended nothing had happened. At 6:30 that evening, Thomas knocked once on my open door and asked, "How'd that feel?" "Awful," I said. "Good," he said. "It means you're still human." The case against Silas got worse before it got better. That's usually how white-collar investigations work. People imagine dramatic arrests and then clean resolution. In reality there are records. Forensic accounting. Internal emails. Badly deleted files. Vendor relationships. Expense patterns. Text chains people thought were informal enough to disappear into the weather. The first reports had made it sound like sloppy reimbursements. By the second month it was clear his company believed he had helped route money through inflated contracts and false entertainment charges to cover client spending that violated policy. Did I know every detail? No. Did I read enough in the press release and indictment summary to understand this was no harmless misunderstanding? Yes. My parents hated that local business sites picked it up. They hated the word scheme. They hated the phrase internal controls. They hated the part where the company emphasized trust. My father stopped going to the club for a while. My mother started speaking in hushed tones to everyone, as if volume had become the enemy. And suddenly, almost hilariously, my profession had a new status in the family story. Now there were references to my hard work. Now there were public mentions of my cases. Now my mother told people, Madeline has always been brilliant. Always. Like a coat she found in the closet and put back on because the weather turned. I heard the second hand from Bethany, an old family friend whose daughter I had once helped with a lease dispute for free. She ran into me outside a coffee shop one Saturday and said, "Your mother was just saying how grateful she is to have a daughter who understands the legal world." I stared at her so blankly she stopped mid-sentence. Then I smiled, because none of this was Bethany's fault, and said, "That must have sounded new." She had the grace to look embarrassed. That's another part of family systems nobody advertises. Once the pattern becomes visible to you, you start noticing how many other people were subconsciously participating just by accepting the story most convenient for the family to tell. For a while I believed the real test would be whether I represented Silas. I was wrong. The real test was whether I would let the crisis rewrite the meaning of everything that came before it. That temptation is stronger than people realize. Because when a family that has neglected you finally turns toward you with urgency and need, part of you, the younger part, the stupid hopeful part, wants to pretend this means you were loved all along in the wrong language. You want to believe the emergency has revealed some deeper loyalty. That underneath the favoritism and the jokes and the empty chairs, they actually knew you mattered and just didn't know how to show it. But need is not the same as recognition. Dependence is not respect. Crisis can imitate love if you're tired enough. I had to learn not to confuse them. Around month 3, Silas asked to meet. Not through my parents. Directly. He texted from a number I didn't know, probably a burner bot because he assumed I had blocked the others. Coffee? Just to talk. No legal advice. That last phrase almost made me laugh. As if legal advice were the only currency he had ever tried to withdraw from me. I should have ignored it. I said yes because I wanted one thing from him that I had not realized I still wanted: honesty. We met at a neutral coffee shop halfway between my office and his apartment, though apartment is not the right word for where he was living by then. He had moved out of the downtown place the week after the indictment. Too expensive once his accounts were frozen and his firm cut him loose. He looked worse than I expected. Not broken. Just diminished. The ease had gone first. That was what struck me. Silas had always moved through rooms like they were already slightly in his favor. Now he looked like someone who had discovered that charm has an exchange rate and the market had turned. He stood when I approached and said, "Thanks for coming." Saturday, what do you want?" He flinched a little. Not because I was rude. Because I had skipped the theater. A barista called a drink order. Cups knocked softly behind the counter. Outside, people walked by with dogs and gym bags and the ordinary concerns of a Saturday morning. I remember all that because mundane settings make family fracture feel even stranger. The world continues buying oat milk while your brother tries to renegotiate history over espresso. He folded his hands. "I know Mom went to your office." "Yes." "She shouldn't have." "No, she's scared." "I know." He nodded as if we had agreed on something meaningful. Then he said, "I'm scared too." That one landed. Not enough to undo anything. But enough to make me remember that beneath the family machinery and the entitlement and the years of being the easy son, he was still a real person sitting across from me with his life in pieces. "I'm sorry you're scared," I said. He looked at me for a long second. Then he laughed once, softly, without humor. That's the most lawyer answer you could have given. No, I said. The most lawyer answer would have cost you by the hour. He almost smiled. For a moment, a dangerous one, we looked like siblings again. Then he said, I guess I didn't realize how bad it had gotten with you. That phrasing. With you. As if the weather had changed on my side of town. I sipped coffee and said nothing. He rubbed a hand over his face. Look, I know we teased you. I know Dad doesn't know how to talk about your work. I know Mom can be, a lot. But I didn't think you really cared about the ceremony stuff. Or Christmas. Or any of that. That was the closest anyone in my family had come to acknowledging the evidence without immediately trying to destroy its value. And why didn't you think I cared? I asked. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Then shrugged. Because you always acted like you were above it. There it was. Not malice. Interpretation. My competence, my restraint, my habit of not begging for equal treatment, he had read all of that as immunity. That is one of the cruelest misunderstandings strong people inspire. If you survive quietly enough, others decide nothing really happened to you. I wasn't above it, I said. I was tired. He looked down at the table. After a while he said, I thought you judged me. I could have denied it. Instead I told the truth. Sometimes I did. For what? For getting to be ordinary. He looked up sharply. I kept going. You got to be late and still be loved. You got to be careless and still be trusted. You got to underperform and still be celebrated. You got to make mistakes and still be the center. I had to be exceptional to be tolerated. He leaned back in his chair as if the sentence had physical force. People often imagine confrontation as loud. Some of the most devastating things I've ever seen in my life were spoken at normal volume across tables with sugar packets on them. He stared at me for a long time. Then he said something I have thought about more than almost any line from that whole year. I didn't know it cost you that much. And I believed him. Not as absolution. As diagnosis. He really hadn't known. Because people protected by a system rarely understand its price unless the bill arrives in their own name. The conversation did not turn magical after that. There was no dramatic apology. No cinematic collapse into mutual tears. He was still defensive in places. I was still angrier than I wanted to admit. He still wanted me to say the case was beatable. I refused. He asked whether I thought the prosecutor hated him. I told him prosecutors don't need hate to proceed. He asked if a jury would see him as a criminal. I told him juries see whatever the evidence is arranged to let them see. But something important changed. Not in him, at least not right away. In me. I stopped needing my brother to confess that my parents had chosen him more. He already had, in the only way that mattered. He had said he thought I was above it. Which meant the pain had been visible enough to register, but my silence around it had made it look optional. We met one more time after that. He looked older again. Thinner. More honest, maybe because panic had started stripping him of style. He told me his lawyer thought the company would push for a plea unless certain records could be undermined. He said Dad still believed the right explanation would fix everything. He said Mom was praying harder than she had in years, which in our house had always meant reality was winning. Then he said, I'm not asking you to represent me. I nodded. I know. I'm asking something else. I waited. When this is over, whatever over means, he paused. Do you think there's any version of us that isn't just this? That question would have made a better movie ending than it made real life. Because real life doesn't hand you a clean emotional finale while the case is still pending and your parents are still rewriting the story by the hour. I answered as honestly as I could. Not if everybody keeps pretending this started with your arrest. He looked down. That bad? Yes. He nodded once. Then, almost to himself, he said, Jesus. The plea came 4 months later. Not total collapse. Not prison doom the way my mother had imagined in her most operatic moments. But real consequence. Financial crimes. Restitution. Supervision. Losses that would follow him into every future version of his career whether he liked it or not. My father took it personally, which had always been his preferred way to experience other people's consequences. My mother called it humiliating. Rachel called it tragic. Silas called it what it was, eventually. A result. Not fate. Not persecution. A result. The family's response to me after that grew stranger, not calmer. Because now there were 2 competing stories available, and they could not maintain both forever. Story 1, Madeline is difficult, cold, dramatic, obsessed with work, always making things into cases. Story 2, Madeline is accomplished, capable, respected, strong, exactly the kind of person a family is lucky to have in hard times. They wanted both. They wanted to keep resenting the cost of my boundaries while also harvesting the status of having me attached to them. My mother started telling people, Madeline helped us so much, which was fascinating because I had not. I had recommended lawyers and declined involvement. But in her version, the mere existence of my advice by refusal still counted as daughterly service. One Sunday she left a casserole at my apartment door with a note that said family first, even in hard seasons. I threw the note away and gave the casserole to my neighbor upstairs, a single father with twin boys who worked nights and never once treated my time like community property. My father tried a different angle. He invited me to lunch. Just the 2 of us. That alone was so unusual I nearly said no on principle. My father did not do one-on-one emotional maintenance. He did practical outings. Car shows. Hardware stores. Club breakfasts. Conversations that only became personal if sports ran out. I went because some stubborn piece of me still wanted to know whether crisis had actually changed anything in him. We met at a place he liked near the river, all white tablecloths and too many men discussing interest rates. He looked tired. More tired than when Silas was first arrested. Consequence ages people slower than panic but more permanently. He ordered iced tea. I ordered coffee. For a while we talked about nothing. Weather. Parking. A restaurant that had closed. He asked one question about work and listened long enough to seem sincere. Then he folded his napkin beside his plate and said, I think you've made your point. There it was. Not apology. Not understanding. Strategy. I set my cup down carefully. What point? He made a small sound of irritation. Come on, Madeline. No, I said. Say it. That you're angry. I looked at him, this man who had watched me spend half my life becoming useful in a language he only respected once it threatened to benefit the wrong child, and felt something in me go quiet. Not rage. Completion. I was angry, I said. Years ago. He frowned. Then what is this? This, I said, is what it looks like when I stop volunteering. He sat back. His whole face changed, not dramatically, just enough to show he had finally run into something he could not father his way around. I don't think we were as bad as you decided, he said. That was the closest thing to self-defense I expected and also the closest thing to confession. Because notice what he was not arguing. Not that the pattern was false. Just that my verdict was too harsh. I could have listed the exhibits. The empty ceremony seat. The public jokes. The gift. The hundreds of smaller calibrations that told me my worth was conditional and mostly transferable. I could have built the case so cleanly even he would have had to see it. Instead I said, "That's okay." He blinked. "What is?" "You don't have to agree with my memory for me to trust it." That line did something a shout never could have done. It removed jurisdiction. He tried once more. "Family shouldn't be this transactional." I almost smiled. There it was again, from the mouth of a man who had never noticed the terms because the contract favored him. "You're right," I said. "It shouldn't." Then I paid for my coffee, left his lunch untouched on the bill like a small final courtesy, and walked out. That lunch was the real ending. Not the arrest. Not the plea. Not my mother in the reception area. The lunch. Because that was when I fully understood that reconciliation, in my family, usually meant agreeing to remember things at the scale most convenient for the people who had done the least suffering. If I accepted that invitation, I would spend the next 10 years being praised for my maturity whenever I helped and criticized for my coldness whenever I declined. The hierarchy would survive with prettier language. No. I changed my number that winter. Not out of drama. Out of architecture. I sent my parents an email with a dedicated address for actual emergencies and a short note that said I needed distance and would not be discussing the past or Silas's case further. I sent Silas a separate message with the same email and one additional sentence: "If you ever want a relationship with me that isn't built on crisis, it will have to be a different kind of relationship than the one we were given." He wrote back 2 days later. "I know." That was all. I believed him. Which is not the same as saying I trusted him. Life after that did not become a movie about chosen family and effortless healing. I distrust narratives that clean everything too fast. There were still holidays. Still old grief. Still moments when I saw daughters take pictures with parents after graduations and felt some small animal grief move inside me. There were still nights I woke up angry that my family had taught me to confuse usefulness with belonging. There were still weeks when I found myself over-explaining boundaries to people who had not actually challenged them, because once you grow up having to justify your own reality, the instinct lingers. But other things happened too. I made partner. Not immediately. Not because life owed me symmetry. But soon enough that it felt earned and late enough that it felt solid. Thomas told me in his office with the same restrained tone he used for everything, then stood up and shook my hand when I left and covered my face at the same time. Ellen hosted dinner for a few of us at their house that weekend. There were flowers. There was too much food. There was the ordinary, almost boring generosity of people who show up when they said they would. I did not tell my parents. That detail matters more than it sounds. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I finally understood the difference between sharing joy and offering access. Weeks later my mother found out through someone at church whose nephew worked in commercial litigation and had seen an announcement. She emailed a subject line that said, "Proud of you always." I stared at it for a long time. Then I archived it unread. Not because I doubted there was some real feeling inside it. Maybe there was. People are rarely all false. My mother probably did feel proud in that moment. My father probably did mention it to someone at lunch. Silas, if he heard, probably did smile in that rueful way he'd started developing after the plea, like a man finally learning that consequence has texture. But pride that arrives only after public validation is not the same as love that sat in the chair when nobody else cared. That distinction is the whole story. A year after the plea, Silas sent me a message asking if I wanted to get coffee again. No emergency. No crisis. Just coffee. I went. He looked steadier. Less polished, more real. He had taken a smaller job in a different industry. The kind that didn't require curated charm or luxury leases or the illusion that every room was his for the taking. He asked about work and listened without pretending to understand things he didn't. I asked how he was and he answered without branding the struggle. At one point he said, "I keep thinking about what you said. About getting to be ordinary." I waited. He stirred his coffee and said, "I used to think I was easier to love because I was easier to be around. Now I think maybe I was easier to love because you were carrying more weight." That was not absolution either. But it was close enough to honesty that I let it sit between us without argument. People always want to know whether I forgave him. I don't know that I think in those terms anymore. Forgiveness, as my family used it, was always suspiciously close to permission. Permission to resume. Permission to reassign. Permission to erase cost. What I have with Silas now, when we have anything, is smaller and stranger and more adult than forgiveness. It is proportion. He knows he is not entitled to me. I know I do not have to disappear for him to exist. That turns out to be more peaceful than the old story ever was. My parents and I do not have much. Birthday texts sometimes. A forwarded article once in a while. A dry note about a relative's surgery. No dinners. No holidays. No pretending. My mother tried twice, in the beginning, to arrange what she called a healing conversation. I declined both times. My father sent one email about family legacy and letting time soften things. I ignored it. Time does soften some things. It just doesn't always do it in the direction people want. What softened in me was not boundary. It was the need to be witnessed by the wrong audience. That is the part one wish I could hand back to my younger self at the courthouse, sitting with an empty row beside her while a stranger's grandmother apologized for loving too loudly. I would tell her this: the silence in those chairs is not a verdict on your worth. It is evidence about their capacity. I would tell her not to waste years converting neglect into ambition just to earn warmth from people committed to misunderstanding her. I would tell her that usefulness can mimic closeness for a long time before you notice the bill. I would tell her that one day the family will call in the middle of the night sounding like they have finally discovered what she is made of, and when they do, she must be careful not to mistake emergency for recognition. Mostly, I would tell her this: the first time they truly respected what you built, it arrived wearing handcuffs. That does not make it love. The night of the arrest, after all the calls and voicemails and the first wave of panic had finally exhausted itself, I went back to the kitchen and reheated my cold takeout. The noodles were worse. The file on the counter still needed attention. The city outside the window had gone from silver blue to ordinary black. I remember standing there, fork in hand, phone silent for the first time in hours, and realizing how strange it felt that the world had not split open. My brother was in custody. My mother was crying somewhere downtown. My father was probably sitting rigid in a chair, trying to convert humiliation into anger. And I was in my apartment, under cabinet lights humming over the sink, reading witness statements for a client who had nothing to do with any of them. It should have felt cruel. Instead it felt true. That may be the cleanest word I have for the life I have now. True. Not tidy. Not healed in the decorative way. Not blessed with cinematic closure or universal remorse. Just true. My work is real. My boundaries are real. My memory is real. My family's crisis did not make me valuable. It only exposed what they had spent years refusing to value unless it could save the wrong person at the right time. I used to think success would make them see me. It didn't. It only made me easier to find when they needed counsel. So I stopped offering my life as office hours. That was the whole change. Not rage. Not revenge. Just refusal. And for the first time, that was enough. I was never the emergency contact. I was the exit they expected to stay unlocked.